Hey, welcome everybody to another Sales Hacker webinar. I'm really happy you could join us today. I'm your host, Colin Campbell. I'm the Director of Marketing at Sales Hacker if you don't know me. And today I'm joined by Jake Brawley. He is the VP of Global Marketing at HighSpot. So Jake, first of all, welcome and thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, hi to you and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Psyched, man. So first of all, let me get something out there right off the bat. To those of you wondering, like, what can two marketing title guys tell us about sales onboarding? You're in for a treat because I used to take care of onboarding account managers and helping with sales onboarding at a marketing agency for like 6 years. And Jake, you're going to be interested in this one because you have, in your position of VP of Global Marketing, you actually are pretty involved in the onboarding at HighSpot. It's like a whole company thing.
Yeah, it's onboarding is not just for sales, and in fact, HighSpot. For those of you who don't know HighSpot, we are a sales enablement platform. That's our technology that we sell. Onboarding is something we think about a lot, of course, in terms of the product we sell, but we also think about it in terms of how we onboard our new employees. So we're a high growth startup. We've actually added 300, 400 people in the last 2 years, and so with that many people onboarding across the company, onboarding is something that's super important for sales, absolutely, but it's important for every single person in the company.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. So we're going to get into that some more for you people watching. We'll dig into like how exactly HighSpot does their own onboarding, how they see their customers doing it in interesting ways. Jake's got some interesting stories to tell. So stick around. And if you have questions, by the way, we want to take them throughout. So go ahead and go right now, at the bottom of your screen, open the chat box, get that popped open. And we like to know who's in the room with us. It'll help us make sure our conversation is right for you guys. So make sure that your the blue bubble thing is set to all panelists and attendees. Just set it to everybody. So everybody, you can talk to each other, ask questions there. Let us know who's here. So like maybe your role, maybe your company, maybe your location. While you are all introducing yourselves, because we want to know who's in the room with us, I want to tell you two quick things. One is that we're recording this webinar. So if you have to step away or you just want to share it because it's awesome, you'll get a recording with the deck tomorrow. And the other thing is that right now, Sales Hacker is running our annual community survey. This is where we ask you for feedback and guidance on what we build next. This is what makes Sales Hacker special. We don't just do whatever the hell we want. We take direction from you all. So you tell us what we want and we go build it. Last year, you told us our website kind of sucked, so we overhauled it. It's faster, the search is better, it's easier to find what you want. Now's your chance to tell us what you want us to do this coming year. And if you take the survey, we're going to give 3 of you $100 Amazon gift cards. So go to the homepage, saleshacker.com right now, and take that survey, please. All right, that's my spiel. Jake, let's see who's here. We've got some biz ops, sales ops people. Ben from Samsung Marketing Division in the UK. Hey, Ben. Jessica, who's a sales trainer in Fort Worth, Texas.
Yeah, Fort Worth.
So Jake's in Seattle. Did you say you're from Fort Worth?
No, I have family in Fort Worth, in Cowtown there, but welcome from Fort Worth.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm in Seattle right now.
You're in Seattle. I'm in Massachusetts. I don't know if people know this. I live like in the middle of nowhere in Massachusetts, guys. We've got John. He's the head of sales enablement. This is the right one for you, John. Technical sales specialist. Desmond, who's a current rep. Interviewing for management position soon. Congrats, Desmond. We're rooting for you up in Ann Arbor. All right, a good mix
Ann Arbor.
here.
My alma mater, good.
Yeah.
Go blue.
Go blue. People from other countries, a few account execs, several managers, biz dev managers, who I assume you guys own onboarding, and a couple enablement people and operations people, which is good. I think this is the takeaway that I had from talking with you before the webinar, Jake, was that this is like onboarding needs to be an all hands thing. And so the mix of titles we have here is good. Guys, keep that chat active and ask questions. Without any further blabbering from me, I'm going to hand it over to Jake, and he's going to teach us some stuff about what effective onboarding looks like, how to do it right, what it looks like when you're doing it wrong, so maybe you can recognize some of the red flags, and we'll share a little bit about how they do it at HighSpot too.
Excellent. Cool. Well, just a little bit about me before we get started. I am, as Colin said, the Vice President of Global Marketing here at HighSpot. I have, before HighSpot, spent a lot of time in and around different sales organizations, doing marketing, doing sales enablement and random forms, but have been now at HighSpot for over 2 years And I'm thrilled to be in the space that aligns what I do for a living with what we do as a company, because I think for those of you on the call and hearing all those different roles and titles, sales just as a functional area of focus, sales technology, there's so much rapid disruption that's happening right now. And it's such an innovative space that's almost being redefined, almost like a renaissance that we're going through. And so the topic of onboarding, for me, is one of those areas, like much of the other areas in the practice, it's going through a similar renaissance. And so I kind of think about what onboarding used to look like and what it's starting to look like today. And the best way that we can take that lens is by looking at what good looks like and maybe what some of the methods that are old and that we're still kind of trying to carry forward just really aren't working in the same format. So that's really the kind of topic of today. So the agenda I have for you, pretty straightforward, but first we'll talk about what do we mean when we say onboarding. Just get the definition out. And then talk about how onboarding relates to sales effectiveness, because I know a lot of you, at the end of the day, we're doing all of this stuff because we need it to result in better sales productivity. And so we'll talk about that relationship and how onboarding is actually a super critical piece of that, sometimes overlooked. We'll talk about, as I said, like some of the old baggage and old behaviors that we've learned that we're kind of using and might not be effective, what some of those pitfalls are. We'll talk about what those that have been through the Renaissance and been to the other side, what that modern onboarding looks like, and then we'll leave you with some tips for how you can think about being more effective with your onboarding practice. All right, so let's jump right in. So let's get the definition out, and of course, it's always tricky doing a definition because everybody might have a little bit of a different flavor of this, but I'll just back up to what I just said. Really, at the end of the day, onboarding is about getting new employees, new hires, and I'm saying employees because I think, like many things in sales today, sales is a team sport and becoming increasingly so. And when we're thinking about quota-carrying reps, super important for onboarding, but really it's about the way I would think about onboarding here is any customer-facing role, whether they're quota-carrying or not. They all need to have proficiency in engaging with the customer for a lot of reasons today. And that's actually one of the drivers behind this renaissance, is because customers and their expectations have changed. That's why onboarding is no longer just a sales-focused thing. It's got to be focused across your go-to-market. And so onboarding here, in the way that we define it, is really about getting customer-facing representatives, right? Don't think sales reps, equipped with the right skills, behaviors, and knowledge to be effective and meet their goals. And the other piece of this here that's really causing a lot of the tension and why it's strategic is because you're trying to do that in the most effective, efficient, and compressed way. And one of the driving factors behind that is that the tenure, especially in sales, the tenure of a sales rep in the kind of economy that we're in today with sales talent, I think on average, stats I've seen puts it anywhere maybe over between 2 and 3 years, maybe on the lower side of that range. But that's super important because you have very little time to make a rep or a customer-facing representative effective in what they're doing if you want to really maximize a return on that talent investment. And here's a cross-section of different statistics in the industry that show what it looks like when effective onboarding is in place. And so one, big one, is faster ramp time, like I said. You're getting somebody day one and you're getting them to day productive in a much quicker rate. And so organizations that have a standard onboarding process and experience have a 54% better productivity. And the productivity can be measured different ways. We'll get into that in a minute, but productivity in terms of the way that they have defined it. The other thing is, especially for a quota-carrying role, what you care about a great deal and what your sales leadership team cares about is, are they achieving quota? And here, attainment of quota, and you guys know a lot about average attainment rates across the industry, but we're talking about 100% attainment. You can actually look at those that are in the cohort of effective onboarding who are doing this well. They have win rates that are markedly better than those that don't have a standardized onboarding process, to the tune of 14%, and quota attainment rates are also improved by about 7 points. And then the final one, as I said, is super important when you're thinking about onboarding. Think about it in terms of retention. You are starting your experience with the new employee and the relationship with them at that moment, and how effective they are and confident they are in their skill set is a big part of whether they're going to stay there. And so 69% of employers are more likely to stay with the organization. Employees, the people you're onboarding are more likely to stay with the organization for at least 3 years, so well above the median that we talked about if they've received a great onboarding experience. So when you're thinking, if you just back away and think about, I got to get new people in, I got to get them effective as soon as possible, and then I want to keep them around. Those are really the business impacts that onboarding touches, and touches in a material way. This isn't just an exercise, this is a tactical exercise. This is why it's super strategic.
I think those stats stand out to me. Like, one reason that's crazy is just like those stats are just if you have any standard onboarding, right? Like, it doesn't even have to be the biggest in the world. It's just you've come up with something and it's a standardized process for everybody.
That's right.
That's kind
versus an ad hoc process or something that you haven't actually put the discipline into saying this is what our onboarding process looks like, then you have a standard process for how you do it.
I don't know about like anybody in the audience, maybe there's people in the audience who've experienced this, but back when I used to manage a team, when I took over the team as a manager, we did not have a standardized onboarding process. It was like some loose shadowing, like you kind of learn the ropes for 3 weeks and then we start throwing accounts your way and we have to like, handhold everything you do for months because the real learning happened as you do the job. And so like I had to go and make a case to my managers, like here's why you should actually put some thought into like what the onboarding looks like here. So I wish I had those stats when I did that. And maybe Jordan agrees.
Well,
Jordan
think about this, Colin. And I won't think any less of you in your answer here, but how confident did you feel in that kind of sink or swim environment? What did your confidence level feel like?
I had like 10% confidence. When I started as an account manager at that organization. And at the end of my first week, my boss walked up to me and said, "Hey, are you ready for an account?" And my thought was like, no, I'm not ready for an account. And I said that, and she said she almost fired me that day. But like, I wasn't ready. What was I supposed to do? I took the accounts anyway. Well, like it didn't matter what I said to that question.
Good for you that you said it, but here's the reality, and here's the nasty truth is that when you're new in an organization and when you're trying to prove yourself, this is the thing that you won't hear, but it's actually at the root. Yeah. It's the underlying cause of all of this, which is like you don't feel confident. And kudos to you for actually saying it, and you got maybe thwacked a little bit for saying it, but like, look, the reality at the end of the day is, as a sales rep, you're going to be out there representing the products and services that you're selling. You've got to be a subject matter expert. Buyer expectations are higher. You can't just come with the base level knowledge that they already have, and so they're actually expecting you to know that, and then to go above and beyond that and add incremental value and insight. So confidence is actually one of the most important factors that's underlying all this, and that's really what effective onboarding leaves your new hires with, is a more confident ability to do what they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, so Jordan Phillips asked if we're going to be sharing this deck. Maybe Jordan's going to grab some of those percentages and show them to their boss. Yeah, everybody, we'll send this deck out to you tomorrow along with the recording. Yeah, so now this might be obvious, but this is the flip side of what happens when you do not have effective onboarding and when you don't have confident new hires coming in. But there's quantifiable difference between those that have a standardized and thoughtful onboarding process and those that don't. These are statistics from CSO Insights, who does a lot of studies in this area, but actually found that ineffective onboarding programs have the impact of a reduced win rate. And so obviously reduced win rate was going to reduce quota rate, and you see that here by about 9%. And so when you think about confidence, these things go hand in hand. If I'm getting feedback mechanism or I'm not confident, I'm not going to be effective in closing more deals and getting achieving my quota. And if I don't feel like I'm able to make traction and achieve my quota, then of course that's a negatively reinforcing cycle where I'm not going to be as confident. And so you got kind of downward spiral, and it all starts with onboarding. And they're slower to ramp. then they're not hitting quota when they are ramped, and they don't stay as long. So you've got this sales team with like a built-in like fail switch, or the opposite of like a failure switch that happens during onboarding. This might be, so I'm really excited about this actually because of who's in the webinar today. We have a good mix. So this is for you, live audience, not if you're watching the recording. We have a poll. We're going to put the poll up right now. I want to see what onboarding looks like at your organization. And I think it's easy. So I'll give you 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1, and then we'll take a look at the results. Hey, not too shabby. So 60% of you, 28 of you who responded, said that you've got a combination of classroom training, in-field observations of others, and self-paced formal e-learning, which is pretty cool. Some people only get the e-learning, some people only get classroom training. About 17% of you get the in-field observation of others, which was what my first onboarding experience was like. Jake, what's your reaction to this?
It's great to see. Actually, we'll get into some of the reasons why having a combined approach is super important. So I'm actually encouraged to see the 60% of you out there are. Of course, that means 40% of you aren't, and which on the 6% of you that answered none informal, you've got your business case now. So good luck on that. But I think this is it's a little bit reflective of what we would expect, and some of these more traditional methods of onboarding are still important, but I think new and more modern ways of thinking about onboarding as an ongoing process and not a point-in-time exercise. We'll start to talk about how that might impact the modes of onboarding too. So I mentioned this as I was looking at the results here, but we talked about the Trialbyfire a little bit already, and that's what Colin experienced at his former employer, and that's still a typical approach. It's like, hey, look, you have a month before you quota ramp, and you're going to be on quota, and you're going to be expected to deliver. And you have sales management, and you have peers that you can tap into, but really it's up to you at the end of the day. And that's a clear recipe for failure.
Can I ask maybe a dumb question that you might know the answer to, Jake? Why is that still so regular? Because everybody who makes that their program has been through that and knows that it sucks. So why is that still like a standard?
I think, where we see this, if we look at kind of the clients we engage with, where we still see this happening maybe more than in other areas is where you have more of a transactional sales approach, and there's still a mentality, all right? And by transactional, I mean, you think high turnover with your sales force. You're coming in and you've got kind of a written playbook, and you think coin operated is kind of the term that you hear used a lot, where like, look, you have capability, you've got a quota, and you're off and running. And I think that's the risk there is that even with that type of high velocity selling, you still have a requirement to be confident and to be equipped to have the best conversations that you can have with the people you're having them with. And that's going to pay dividends, and even a transactional high velocity selling business. So that's where we tend to see this more. I don't know, I'd be interested, Colin, in your perspective there, but that's my take on the Trialbyfire approach.
I haven't seen, a lot. What I saw, I kind of built my own, but I did have a couple co-managers that seemed comfortable with the Trialbyfire approach, and I think there was a little bit of the attitude of like, this is how I did it, so you have to do it too. I think
that's really interesting.
They felt like they had earned their stripes that way, and that was like what it took. You gotta show what you have, what it takes to do it on your own. I don't know. I guess I always believed in servant leadership, so my goal was to just add more enablement everywhere I could. But that's not everybody.
That's super interesting, and that's another thing that we see that's under Renaissance, if you will, which is like, look, the playbook that I used 20 years ago or 10 years ago, if I'm now in sales leadership and sales management, that no longer applies. And so it's not surprising why onboarding that's oriented around that would fail, because You're seeing a new generation of sellers that have a new approach to selling, and you're seeing a new generation of buyers, buying behavior, and the old playbook just doesn't work. So Trialbyfire just set up for disaster right out of the gate. The other one is method isolation. This is the one I was happy to see in your survey results because 60% of you said you have multi-mode. But if you don't have a multi-mode and where you're keeping these methods isolated, if you're treating your sales kickoff maybe as part of your onboarding experience, if you have new employee orientation that's maybe disjointed from your sales onboarding process, if you're actually treating the modes of onboarding in silos, that's what we mean by method isolation. And that sets up a bad experience and a disjointed experience for the people that are going through that onboarding program. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then the final is kind of the one and done mentality. And this is like, okay, we've got a 2-week onboarding program and you start, and once you're through that, then it's done. And this is what I kind of mentioned with continuous onboarding or ongoing onboarding, which is a different approach and mentality to thinking about onboarding. We'll talk about that as well.
So on the last slide,
So
Darren McMoore had I think it's a good point, which Darren, so you're a director of inside sales at 360 Learning in NYC. And Darren said that the trial by fire mentality, or really maybe any of these like shortcomings, could just be due to like people not knowing what they don't know, which is a good point. And then Jessica Buell had, I hope I'm saying your last name right, Jessica, had a question. So when you're bringing in really seasoned reps, once you get them over, like, here's what the company's about, here's what the solutions are, here's what the products are, is a trial by fire approach somewhat effective considering the experience they bring to the table? Like, you've got reps who know how to sell, you get them familiar with the product, can they just go do their thing?
Well, I think it depends, because again, what I said before is if you're thinking about experienced reps, they might be experienced or trained up in a methodology that's maybe more traditional. And not all of those behaviors are great behaviors or translate for every business model. So I do think it depends on what profile you're hiring in from and what your current business model looks like. And so I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, unfortunately. But based on the proficiency of your inbound reps, you have to be absolutely thoughtful about what your onboarding looks like and what you're doing with maybe reps that are coming in with more experience versus those that are less experienced, what those onboarding paths look like. Yeah,
because you have to, you can have a sense of how experienced reps are when they come in, but you don't know them as a person. You can't know them as a person from the interviewing process. And especially if you're selling a business that needs to scale, like a lot of us probably have SaaS solutions in this webinar, you have to have some level of consistency, right? Like, you have to at least get a baseline where you know where people are at. So putting them through a standardized training program or onboarding program is probably still a good idea. Sheila had another question that I think this is a good question too, because at every job I've ever taken, I started before day one. Sheila asks, can or does onboarding start before day one as an employee, or maybe should it?
Oh, that's a great question. So there could be legal implications there depending on your business model, but day one means day one on payroll. It's hard to ask somebody to do some things before they've come in, but I think the better that you can equip somebody to be successful, and certainly you're in conversations with them during the interview process and having some tips, tricks, pointers of things that make a profile successful at your organization, I think that's absolutely fair game. And I love the innovation and approach to thinking about onboarding, not only day one plus, but also prior to day one. And there's a lot that can be done there for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think it's too much it depends what you want to hire people who are going to be ready on day one, whatever that means to them. So if they need 2 weeks before they start to like decompress from their last really, really stressful role that had their brain all kind of messed up and they can't think, then give them that 2 weeks. But you can select for that. Like, if you want people who are the type of go-getter, the type of preparer who's going to do their homework, whether you ask them to or not before they start, then you can look for that in the interview process. But you probably should avoid telling them to.
That could be an interesting innovation there. Give kind of a standardized relaxation and vacation package before you even start. Mandatory, hey. 2-week, clear the mind, get a tan. That could be a good approach to onboarding for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those three. We'll talk about them a little bit. We talked about Trialbyfire a little bit, but you may be familiar with the 10,000-hour concept. This, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell in one of his books, or maybe it was a Macklemore song. I'm not sure which. But the idea that it really takes a substantial amount of time to become an expert. And SiriusDecisions research here that 66 days is required to form a new habit. Now, it's not enough to form a new habit just by learning. And so onboarding, if you're thinking like, hey, look, we've got self-guided learning, we've got e-learning, we've got some classroom training, that's not even what this is talking about. And so part of the reason a Trialbyfire doesn't work is because you need to have knowledge, but then you need to have the opportunity to put that knowledge into practice, and you need to be able to do it over an extended period of time. And if you aren't doing that, you're setting somebody up for failure. And here's kind of the amazing stat is that 18% of B2B sales organizations still put their reps in front of buyers on their first day.
That's terrifying.
And so, yeah, it's terrifying also if you're sitting in the marketing seat too, as you're thinking about, look, we care about creating a great customer experience across the entire funnel. And sometimes that experience starts with the first conversation. Oftentimes it's starting with some of the interaction that they're having with marketing collateral. But the idea that you're putting somebody out there who doesn't know the brand, who doesn't know how to represent the product, and is just expected to sell, also sets up kind of an interesting customer experience. And so that's absolutely a scary statistic.
I think it's scary as a buyer.
Yeah.
Maybe next time I take a demo, I'm talking to someone who just really has no idea. What if I miss out on a good solution because somebody flubs a discovery call? You know what I mean?
Hey, well, part of your due diligence as a buyer is you want to ask that sales rep, well, how long have you been in the role?
That's
are you the right person for me to talk to?
Yeah.
So, and that's, I talked about modern buyers before. Buyers they're getting super savvy. They often know more than the sales reps in many cases. And so, buyers are no longer on a journey. They're there and they're expecting to have a destination, and they're expecting their salesperson to point them to the destination. So, I touched on this a little bit, but when we're talking about siloed methods of onboarding, you think about your classroom training. There's a place for that. Self-guided e-learning, there's a place for that. And in-field observations. Out of all of these, in-field observations, and in-field is kind of a tricky term, but really there's a lot of ways for managers and others to provide coaching and feedback now. And coaching, I don't have to tell you guys, it's gotten a lot of focus for a reason. But the thing that is interesting to understand about coaching, and unfortunately I didn't include the slide in here, is that when you look at effective coaching as part of your onboarding, we're not talking about, test and accreditation. Great, you've done the demo. Great, you've done a first meeting. It's been observed. I've given you feedback, or maybe I've done 2 or 3 observations. You, again, with the point of the Malcolm Gladwell, the 10,000 hours, you see it takes over 20 observations before you see a meaningful difference in the performance of an organization. And so,
wow.
The key, it's a piece of SiriusDecisions research, but there's a clear differential between putting training into practice. That's the big takeaway here. Other modes of traditional training, traditional onboarding, they're asynchronous. I learn something, and then I have to go do something. The best, most sticky way to actually train and onboard and teach is to actually, what I would think of as more an action-based learning, or an action-based learning curriculum, in the moment of every action and activity, putting it into practice. And so that you're not just doing a training, a test out, a cert, you're not just taking an e-learning course, you're actually walking into the sales action And as you're walking into that sales action engagement, you are then getting reinforcement of all of these things. And so it's multi-mode, but it's also putting it at the point of action. So I think that's super important.
Not to mention, like, some people learn different ways, right? Like, I test well. I can crush almost any test you give me. That doesn't mean I can do anything. You know what I mean? Like,
that's exactly right. Well, and I'll tell you this too, because I've seen the way that some of these tests are constructed, and for those of you out there, you know you're guilty of this. You know, some of these are, look, yeah, I opened the doc, it was multiple guests, and I got the pass, and I actually don't retain any of that information because it's a checkbox exercise. And so that's the last thing you want. The only way to get out of that, to make it real, is to actually put it into action.
Right. So does this speak to not just like having multiple modes, but also like the length of time? You said 20 observations. Does that mean that we all think onboarding is faster than it really should be?
When I say traditional onboarding, that's what I would call traditional onboarding. It's we have a 1-week curriculum. That's our onboarding program, and then we look at how well did we get somebody to quota. You know, that's more of a traditional type approach. And I think that's absolutely what we're saying is, first of all, sustained and extended is the right way to think about onboarding. If your onboarding program isn't, at least have a 90-day horizon. Yeah, I don't care if you're in a velocity sales environment, transactional sales environment, or a long enterprise sales cycle with a highly consultative sell. You need to have a sustained approach to onboarding across all of these modalities.
So I want to talk about HighSpots onboarding a little bit, but yeah, can we do that now? Because you told me a little bit about what your program looks like, and I think people will be super interested because it's so different from anything I've heard of.
Yeah, it's different than anything I've done in the past too, and you know, we're fairly, we have a cultural term we call invent the future, and so we never take anything at face value. There's no one right way to do something. But one of the things that became apparent for us as an enablement technology company and using our own technology to do what we do, and the importance of onboarding in the context of enablement is we believe, and we see this quantitatively, that this is a strategic differentiator for us. Onboarding is a strategic differentiator for HighSpots business, and we've actually put significant investment. And again, I mentioned at the beginning of the call, you know, in my time here, in two years, we've gone from about 50 employees to, we're going to go through 400 in a short space of time. And so we're onboarding a lot of new people. And what we've done is we've actually put together an intensive 4-week program. And we've actually expanded the concept beyond just sales and quota carrying or even customer facing. This is for any employee in our organization. They go through a 4-week intensive program of onboarding that's just the beginning of the onboarding process. And so
the 4 weeks is for everybody non-specific of department. That's
correct. Now, during that time too, we also have space for functional onboarding. And so if I'm hiring somebody into my marketing team and they're in a specific function, they'll start to get more functional specific onboarding that my team will do hands-on. But it's so important that we have a consistent customer experience, that we have shared knowledge and the value prop and the pain points that we uniquely address and solve. And that's true for anybody, whether you're in a customer-facing role, quota-carrying role, or you're an engineer and you're working on product. And so we've actually put this concept of onboarding on steroids. And of course, we use our HighSpot, we use our own product to facilitate a lot of that onboarding. And like I said, that 4-week intensive program then is just the beginning of what becomes an onboarding program that's continuous. And so there's continuous onboarding for us includes continuous training, continuous coaching, continuous learning. And of course, we use our own product, and a major part of our product and what the capability does is it brings all of that at the point of sales action. And so that's why I talk a lot about it, but I'm a big believer that that's the best way to retain and make something stick, is to put it in the moment. If I'm a rep and I'm going into my afternoon meeting, I'm preparing for it, maybe that morning, or a lot of cases right before the meeting, and then I'm actually having that engagement. I have to have the knowledge, the coaching, all that stuff at that particular moment. I can't draw upon what I knew in my onboarding classes 2 weeks ago. So yeah, that's a little bit about our own onboarding process.
And so if you have a new VP level peer starting on Monday, they're going to do that whole, it doesn't matter that they're not an IC, they're going to do the whole program.
Absolutely.
And then, so 4 weeks is a lot. What, if you can share, what kind of content is delivered in there that isn't delivered at other companies that you've seen? Like, how do you fill 4 weeks?
Yeah, so, one of the, especially in the technology space, one of the things that we often get knocked on is that we're too product-centric. And so to be effective, and a lot of onboarding programs are actually doing for this as well, is that they really focus on, here's our products, here's our services, here's what we sell. And that's certainly important. But potentially more important than that is really understanding who are the buyer personas that you're targeting. What do they care about? Who are these people? What are their pain points? And how then do the products uniquely solve them? And so I would, I'm not going to say that it's unique and different, because you're probably thinking, yeah, we do that. For any organization I've been at, especially in the tech industry, it's always friction of trying to move away from too much product centricity too early, especially for sales roles, because it's very, most product and innovation companies are engineering led. It's very much about the product. But for both product and for, of course, sales to be relevant, it's got to start with your buyer. And so that's one piece that we emphasize in there.
Interesting. We've got another, this is probably the last question for this section. So good question from Martine. It's a big question. I'm going to focus in on one part of your question, Martine, which is when you have a new hire shadowing a more tenured colleague. Martine says it's often challenging for the more tenured person because they're taking time out of their day to, that's basically time away from sales, right? And so people are complaining that they miss out on quota, or it's harder for them to do their jobs. How do you guys handle that?
Yeah, I think, so we definitely have a peer approach, but we also have a significant, not just quota carrying sales rep, we have a significant team of account development reps. And, you might have the equivalent of an SDR or others, but there's a good amount of knowledge, especially if you think about an account development or sales development rep that's talking to prospects earlier in the cycle. They have a very good bead on what are those pain points, who are the personas, and they aren't carrying dollar quota. Okay, they're quoted on making sure that qualified leads are going through the funnel, but they don't have an actual dollar figure at the end of the day like a quota-carrying sales rep does. So if you're thinking about sales productivity, one of the ways to pair up is to think about how to do that in concert with your teleprospecting team or your development team, whether you call them SDRs, ADRs, BDRs, if that's part of your business model. I think that's something that we do, is something you should definitely look at doing.
That's interesting. So expanding the idea of what is a peer, basically. Like,
that's exactly
it doesn't have
right.
to be one role. Yeah, very cool. Okay, yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, this is the final one. The common pitfalls is the one and done. And the concept here is really, if you aren't getting hydrated with new and ongoing information, you're just going to forget it after 6 days. 3/4 of all information, you've already forgotten it after 6 days. And I know this is true of myself. I know this is definitely true for reps that are now thinking about the next deal that they're chasing, the next opportunity that they need to focus on. This is why that one and done, okay, I've been through onboarding, or I went through an airlift, and even in a SCO format, this is why training/onboarding doesn't work in this asynchronous manner. It's got to be ongoing.
So I think this is a good spot. I'm going to take a really quick break. I want to put another question to the audience. So guys, get your clicker fingers ready. We have another question for you guys. Want to know, and we'll have that poll up in a second, we want to know how you measure success of your onboarding program. So like if you were a rep and you went through your program, was it you were successful in onboarding when you completed a test or when you hit quota? Pick your answer from that selection. giving you a little more time this time because somebody said I should have given more time last time. All right, so we're going to close that one. And we'll look at the results of this one too. Because in a second, we're going to talk about how you make an effective program. Okay, all right, so just a quick summary. A couple of you have your own metric. If you have your own metric, do pop it in the chat. 5 of you said you did. I want to hear what those are. 4 of you said it's like, did you attend the classes or trainings? 7 of you said it's about your ramp time. 11 of you is time to first deal, and then the biggest answer, 37% of you, 16 of you said that it's about rep attainment. So Desmond says that they really aren't measuring it. It's like you go through the program and then you're onboarded, basically, right, Desmond? Cheryl said it's actually a combo of the above, so you're looking at like a portfolio of metrics. Cheryl, that's cool.
Yeah.
And Adam, he disagrees on quota attainment since even the best of reps can have a bad territory makeup or a poorly designed quota. Yeah, kind of depends. Are you taking over for somebody who like you can step into a pipeline, or are you going to start fresh and build your own pipeline? Are you just going to get past the worst accounts from the rest of the team who, you know, hey guys, this new rep needs some accounts. Can you give them 5, please? Not going to give them your best ones, are you? Jessica says we monitor pipeline activity for the reps first 24 months.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And how quickly you can show success and understanding of the product after ramp, from Megan. All right, what's your reaction to all that, Jake?
I love the monitoring productivity over a 24-month horizon. Now, I hope the onboarding and the continuous onboarding horizon somewhat matches that too, because that's a long lead time. But I think you know, some of the pitfalls here. This isn't surprising necessarily, but I think you guys already mentioned them. Anytime you're looking at quota attainment, first time to deal, there's a lot of different ways to juice that metric, and there's a lot of things maybe outside of the control of onboarding that impact that metric. It's important for sure. Ramp time, I think, is where we gave you the most leeway there, because what does that mean necessarily? I don't know what ramp time means, but that's, I think, in my mind, the idea that we're going for here, which is, you know, and I'll quote my friends at SiriusDecisions, Peter Ostro, who says, time to first deal, even time to second deal, which is another pretty decently common metric, those are flawed for a lot of reasons. Time, he would say time to first competency. And if you think about that and all of the coaching and the observations and things like that, time to competency really takes into account a lot of the factors. That's why I like the 24-month horizon answer. I think that's pretty good.
How do you guys do it at HighSpot?
Well, I think the person that answered, it's a combination of, we certainly care about those as leading and lagging indicators. I think it's important to look at both. But we absolutely think about time to proficiency, and time to proficiency is a combination of not just the sales productivity, but in terms of those observations, qualitatively, how proficient are sales reps in their engagements. That's a very difficult thing to put a quantification on, except it's still super important. And so even though it's a quantified qual observation, it's an important way for somebody, a human being, to say, yep, this person is at the top tier caliber based on the observed engagements.
Right, so it sounds like it comes down to a mixture of metrics and basically input from that person's manager who says like, yeah, they got it.
Yeah, of course we look, yeah, I mean, we, you know, like I said, we use HighSpot for everything that we do. And so the feedback and the analytics that we get in our own product about all of the things, hey, how and when are you engaging? What content and materials are you engaging with? Are you consuming the guidance at the appropriate times? And when you're consuming the guidance, then is that actually tied to deal progression, deal velocity, higher deal values, all of those things? And so, you know, there's a heavy quant piece that's absolutely super important, and then there's a qualitative piece that's also added into that.
Got it. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So your tool makes it easy for it not to just be like a subjective manager's opinion about how good the rep is.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's the other danger, is that a lot of organizations will only do the qual. And, an opinion is formed very quickly about somebody who's onboarding and they're 3 months out of role, 6 months out of role. And it can be dangerous to assess something that way. And so getting analytics into a lot of the leading indicators and activity and proficiency that we haven't had before helps kind of take the subjective viewpoint away and puts it into something that's more data-driven. I think that's super important. It's absolutely, what our product does.
Got it. Cool.
So now we'll talk about effective, and I think we've already kind of beat this one to the ground, but effective onboarding is multi-mode. And so if you are just looking at one mode of delivery, I encourage you to start to mix it up a little bit. Here's some recent research that ST did around effective onboarding in some different modes. And so 62% of high-performing organizations were more likely to do role play. And so that's another big mode that we haven't really talked about much, but it's super effective. It's putting the knowledge into action, even though it's in a non-risk or lower risk action. Self-paced video observation is another big thing that high-performing onboarding organizations are doing. And a mentor program, we kind of touched on that a little bit, is something that we're seeing with more effective organizations.
Very cool. I've been at 3 organizations now that claim to have a mentor program that didn't exist in actuality. The mentor program went as far as like pairing you up and then no check-ins or management of how that mentorship takes place. Do you have any tips for making that actually effective?
Well, making it effective starts with actually doing it. So that'd be one thing. I can't believe you're sold false bill of materials there, but it's got to be embraced by the sales management. It's got to be something that you're looking at and you're asking about in the same way that you're inspecting your pipeline. And that's really the only way that you can get something like that instituted in a way that it's going to make it's an expectation that people are doing it, and it's something that's actually measured and looked at.
Yeah. Okay. Devil's in the follow-up as usual.
That's right. Another thing, and this is pretty straightforward, but that you're preparing those critical customer conversations before they engage, and I would say also during engagement, as we kind of touched on. And then it's got to be something that's continually reinforced through self-service. And so while there's instructor-led, there's peer-to-peer, there's coaching and mentorship, there's got to be the ability for a rep to then in their day-to-day have ongoing and at their fingertips access to those materials, again, when they're doing the different things that a salesperson or a customer-facing role has to do with the customer. Every point in the sales process, at every point in their engagement, that they have relevant and contextually accurate guidance, along with then content and assets that I'm going to be leveraging. All of that has to be at every point of action that they're doing. And that's where you start to really bring proficiency and sales activity together for continuous onboarding that actually is highly effective. Oh, I'm not seeing a graphic on this one. I don't know why. I think we had maybe a lovely picture in here, so you can
It was a beautiful picture. So imagine
Wasn't
a very happy, very successful salesperson. That's what the picture
There
was.
you go. Yes. But, I've talked a little bit about HighSpots technology. We are a sales enablement platform, and that's what our technology does. There's others on the market that do it, and I would encourage you to evaluate. But really, part of this renaissance and part of addressing modern onboarding and modern enablement is that our technology is finally in a place where we can start doing guidance at the point of sales activity, and we can actually start having that be a thing that really works. And it's not just a pie in the sky. It's something that I can go in as a sales rep in my CRM and opportunity record, and it's there. I've got it in front of me. It's in my inbox. It's in the places that I'm already engaging. And so it has to be key that those things work in all of the systems that you're already working in as well for it to be useful. And this is another very pleasant picture here, so you can picture that. But the kind of what we'll leave you with today, just some straightforward tips. First of all, hopefully we frame for you that this should be a priority. And there's a case there that says this needs to be a strategic priority because it has meaningful impact to your business. Look at the blended training approach. So think about those channels. What are my channels that I'm using for delivering my onboarding and training approach? And really be thoughtful about that across those different channels. And the integration with your sales technology and looking for modern sales technology to make this come together. That's how you move from an ad hoc onboarding process, or maybe a point in time or Trialbyfire, into something that's actually a standardized process and something that can be measurable, which is a fourth tip. Have to be able to track progress and performance. If you don't have the ability and the tools to get analytics into that, you need to have those, because that's the only way that you can take the subjective and emotional conversation into one that's actually driven from data and facts. So that's what I would leave you with today.
Love it.
And
thank you so much, Jake.
Pictures missing too. How about that?
At least they can see us. We're still here,
That's
everybody.
Right.
We didn't turn invisible. We do have a few minutes for questions, so if you have questions, fire them off into the chat. We'll take a couple if you have them. I also want to remind everybody, I mentioned this at the start, some of you might not have been here. Sales Hacker is running our annual community survey. So we need feedback from you, especially you, because you're in the live version of this webinar. Today, please go to the saleshacker.com, the homepage. The survey is right there in the middle of the page. It's the big one. It takes like 3 minutes. You'll be entered to win an Amazon gift card. The real value that you get is that your feedback helps us build stuff and stuff that you want. Like we don't just decide what to do. We actually take direction from you all. So tell us what you want and we'll build it. So we got a good question here from Mary. So what are some tips for making LMS successful so it's not boring?
Well, maybe we need to throw away the term LMS first. Yeah, the whole idea of a learning management system in and of itself is what we've been talking about. That's a siloed system. So I think the idea is, how do we make training not just not boring, but how do we make it useful? And if you're still taking an approach where you're asking people to go through a curriculum, where you are asking them to do kind of a test and certification, and that's the extent of kind of the LMS and training focused, well, it's probably going to be pretty boring. I don't think any of us like to think back to our school days, and maybe Colin's good at taking tests, but I don't know that anybody necessarily enjoys test taking and sitting in a classroom. People do like hands-on. They like to put their learning into practice, and whether that's happening in a virtual environment, in some of the scenarios that we talked about, or a live fire environment, I think that's where learning starts to become exciting, is when you bring the action-based piece of it and applying it in a simulated environment or a real-world environment.
So can you describe how that looks like at HighSpot? Like, give us an example, because I know you said there's some peer-to-peer learning that you guys do. There's some like classroom-style stuff, right?
Oh yeah, we definitely have we do sales kickoff. We've got classroom training, instructor-led training, but almost all of those have a high component of exercise and simulation activities. And so while we'll get some knowledge, a bulk of the time is spent actually driving some real-world case studies. We'll get some opportunity profiles and engagements that we're familiar with or that we've worked through in the past, and we'll actually do live trial and live fire exercises. How would you pitch to this persona in this particular situation? And so those are the things that make it a little bit more real, and we'll actually do some of the role play scenarios where I might put myself in the role of a persona, and I'll have a new salesperson that's having a conversation, doing some initial discovery. Based on the discovery, then expected to kind of showcase some of the solution. And so some of those simulated environments, that's something we absolutely use in all of our onboarding and training.
That's really cool. So you're painting, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I had imagined before that a mixed mode onboarding program might have like a day of classroom learning, a day of peer shadowing, a day of e-learning. But what you're describing is more like you're in a classroom and there's a quick e-learning exercise, and then you discuss as a group, and then you break into peer-to-peer. It sounds like you're switching modes more quickly. Is that right, or am I making that?
We're switching modes, and we aren't excluding those modes. You're absolutely right. So I'm giving you some of the classroom and live fire simulations, but then there's actually putting that into live practice as well. And so self-guided training, that's a big part of our onboarding. Classroom and instructor-led, the role-playing, coach and enforcement, the mentoring, all of those are aspects of the program, and we're not doing any of them in a sequential fashion. They're all typically happening in a parallel fashion.
Got it.
So we'd be doing
That's really cool.
one set of exercises, and we go into another.
That's very cool. Good question, Mary. Thank you very much. There's probably time for one more if anybody wants to sneak one in. Give you a couple seconds to think about it. Okay, so Mary's follow-up question is, how do you track all the training taking place across so many different types of training? Where do you keep track of it all? There must be some kind of monster spreadsheet, right?
No, we don't use spreadsheets. We use our product. So all of the modes that I described, those are taking place in and around our product. And in our product, we have technology called Smart Pages, and those Smart Pages are really the place where you could either think about curriculum, you could think about guidance, you could think about content in any of those modes. And so the first thing we want to look at is, okay, individual, have they gone through the exercises? Have they shown proficiency through those exercises? And then are they leveraging and running the plays in a proficient way? And so part of it, sure, is certainly attendance, right? If you can't win if you're not even there to play, but a lot of the analytics that we're tracking are coming out of our product. And no spreadsheets.
No spreadsheets.
No.
Can't wait for the day. All right. Thanks for the questions, everybody. Great group today. Love the questions. Love your engagement. Thank you. Appreciate it. Please go take our survey on our homepage. Big thank you to Jake Brawley, VP of Marketing at HighSpots. Jake, thanks again, man.
Thank you, Colin. Thanks to Sales Hacker. Really always enjoy these.
It was a pleasure. Yeah, we'll do it again soon. Thanks, everybody, for stopping by. We'll see you on another Sales Hacker webinar very soon.